We zijn in het Vondelhotel in Amsterdam en bij ons de gast is Francisco Stork met zijn boek Marcelo and the Real World, in het Nederlands vertaald als Marcelo en de echte wereld. Francisco Stork, welcome in Holland.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Thank you. You wrote a book, Marcelo and the Real World, which is about a young boy with a high-level autism, Asperger's syndrome. Can you, in short, explain what this kid is suffering from?
Marcelo has trouble interpreting some of the things that we take for granted, some of the social rules of the world. For example, he has trouble interpreting facial expressions by other people. He is very literal, so when people use a figure of speech, he doesn't quite understand what that means. He prefers to be alone. He hears a kind of a music that nobody else can hear. So he's very highly intelligent, and he has a special interest that one can almost say is an obsession with religion. So all of those things kind of set him apart from what we would ordinarily call quote-unquote normal.
Yeah. So he's kind of living inside of his own head, inside of his own mind.
Which is what autism is, except that there are different levels of autism, as you know, from somebody who is just totally closed in within him or herself to somebody who has some contact with the world, like Marcelo, and who can function there, but he still has some problems there with social interaction, communication, and also in the way that he thinks, which is a highly kind of a logical type of thought process.
Yeah. Is he happy just with being himself?
Well, that's sort of the crux of the book in many ways. You know that Marcelo is happy. He lives in this little tree house. He listens to his music. He goes to a special school, and he's perfectly content. His father, however, thinks that that's not enough. That he needs to be able to function in what his father calls the real world, which in many ways is the world that deals with competition, with evil, and so forth. So, the question that remains unanswered is whether Marcelo wouldn't have been maybe he would have been better off to be left alone and grow at his own pace rather than to be pushed into the world like his father pushed him.
Yeah. Of course, his father wants to do the good thing for his own kid, like a normal father does. So he wants him to be part of the real world, but it doesn't go as smooth as the father had planned. Can you tell us a little bit of what happens next when he really enters the real world?
Well, his father is a high power attorney, has his own law firm, so he gets Marcelo to work in his mailroom, and there Marcelo meets some good things, like his fellow co-worker Jasmine, who becomes his very good friend, and perhaps falls in love with. And at the same time, he meets some very kind of shady characters, and he discovers some things in the law firm that perhaps are legal, but perhaps not totally moral.
Okay. And what is the consequence of this? He discovers something he doesn't understand, he doesn't think is right. What happens?
Well, then Marcelo has to make some decisions. On the one hand, he could pursue trying to do something about the discoveries and maybe perhaps hurt his father, hurt his business, or he could do what he thinks is right. So I won't tell you what he does so that you can get the book.
It's true. Is it true that the values of right and wrong are very important for someone with Asperger's syndrome?
They're very kind of people with Asperger's syndrome have a very high, it's very difficult for them to tell lies, and they do have a very kind of almost a black and white view of the world in some ways. But right and wrong is they know what's right and they know what's wrong.
There's not very much novels about main characters who have Asperger or autism. What was the reason for you to write this book about a Asperger kid?
Well, I primarily, I really wanted to write a book about a special young man who had a very special, unique interest in religion. And when I started writing about this character, I discovered that there were many people who had similar characteristics, and that even our society had already given them, these people, a diagnosis, had diagnosed these people with a disability, and which was Asperger's syndrome. But my primary function was at the beginning was artistic, if you will. I wanted to create a unique kind of character. And then when I discovered that there were people like that, I started doing some research and came up with that.
Yeah. How many research did it take to really make this a life-worthy protagonist?
Well, I read quite a bit on Asperger's syndrome, specifically when Asperger's syndrome was being differentiated from other types of autism. Dr. Asperger, who began to see that there were some people with autism who could really be said to have something that was a little bit different. But then I interviewed kids that had Asperger's syndrome, and I drew upon my own experience in working with mentally handicapped when I was young to come up with this portrait of Marcelo.
Yeah, yeah. Can he survive in the real world? His father makes him work like a normal man, and he has to face other people and other values, perhaps. Can he survive as an adult?
After his experience, I think he could survive even before. It would just take him a little bit longer. He goes to a special school, which I think he's doing quite well. I think his father, in some ways pushes him, like all father wants to do is just. Pushes him a little bit too hard. But I think Marcelo will be able to survive in the real world. Not the kind of world perhaps that his father lives in, but he's going to have to find his own world, where he can fit in. Yeah. And I believe that there's a place for people like Marcelo in the world.
There's a place for everyone, so also for Marcelo, perhaps.
I hope so. Yeah. Otherwise, we're all in trouble.
Okay, Francesco Stork, thank you very much for this interview.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Very good questions.
You're welcome.